Domains workshop curriculum for your community. And so this is interesting. And I told folks here that I would take the lead on it because I'm like the, long tooth bearded man sitting around back when I did domains. And so they said, maybe you could be useful for something around here, Jim. And I said, yes, for the long.
Because you haven't said anything in the past 2 days.
I heard that. These are working, so
I wasn't muted.
I know you weren't. Am I muted right now? Because
no,
I'm kidding.
We can hear you.
Anyway, I did want to talk a little bit about kind of some of this has been a process, and it was interesting to see John Stewart reference it this morning with some of the work he had done with Keegan. And I know that Taylor has some work to talk about that they'll be doing here at St. Norbert's. And there are a bunch of folks who have built curriculum around helping faculty, students, and staff think through what a domain of one's own is, but even more broadly, what it means to work on the web, through the web, with the web, when you're talking about teaching and learning and disciplines. And so one of the things I think went really well early on when we were doing this at the University of Mary Washington is we built a curriculum which was basically called the UMW, or Domain of One's Own Faculty Initiative. And so I'm sharing my screen there, and you can kind of get a sense of the site. If you're looking to go to it, it's fi.umw.domains. Let me just make sure that's the right URL. I think it is. No, it's fi.umwdomains.com. We kind of pulled a fasty there, so forgive me. So what this was it was basically like a 6-week curriculum where we brought in usually a librarian, faculty from different disciplines, and at times a student. And we would have these weekly meetings where we would talk about various elements of the web, which I thought was really pretty cool. One of the things you can see, and I'll jump to this, is you can get a sense from that site, fi.umwdomains.com, that the curriculum here is built in to the site. So if you look at week 1, right, which I think is pretty cool, and this was kind of in the air at the time, a lot of people were talking about the essay by Vannevar Bush. I don't always know if I pronounced that right because my pronunciation already has issues, but As We May Think, which for many folks was the kind of beginning of Engelbart's search for this idea of augmentation of human intellect through computers and as a result through the web. And then we talked about stuff like Small Pieces Loosely Joined and 7 Ways to Think About the Web, which we linked to yesterday with John Udell. And the interesting thing here is this discussion wasn't about here's cPanel, like here's your domain, like dig in. This discussion was about what is the web? What are its roots? And how did those thinkers who started to bring this to bear imagine it? Both, historically back in the 50s or 40s and more contemporarily. And this goes on to deal with issues like if you look at week 2, you'll see that there's a whole issue about digital identity. And Dana Boyd leads off that discussion talking about, questions of how youth and identity through the web are fashioned and forged. And it was actually a really compelling 6-week intense discussion between various ed techs at UMW, Martha Burtis, Andy Rush, myself, Tim Owens, Mary Kaler, who is running the Teaching and Learning Center. And we really spent time working with our faculty and staff to think through what it means to be on the web. And so we would have these readings and people would blog about them. You'll see from the site, there's also a place where we're aggregating the blog posts because that was a thing once and people actually willingly blogged when you brought them in this stuff. But the other thing that we did is each session was a discussion and then a focus on one tool that maybe abstracted out some of those notions of identity, like domains. So we would talk about the kind of more philosophical implications of digital identity, but then we would dig into what it means to choose a domain or what it means to think about subdomains and subdirectories and structuring space. And so every week we would really kind of dig in on a topic, both philosophical about the web, but then very practical. And this is the way we brought in, I think it was over 60 to 70 faculty. And you have to think UMW has 200 faculty. So we had a wide range of impact. And we did not focus just on teaching faculty. We focused on administrative faculty. We focused on select students. And we tried to make this a varied group where this discussion would have real bearings in the intellectual process that everyone was going through with classes and readings and reflection and writing, right? I mean, we were at a university. Nothing we were asking them to do seemed odd or strange. So I think in terms, if you are thinking, and I highly recommend it. If you can do this, if you can bring something like this together, I highly recommend creating a structure where you can bring in not only faculty, but admin faculty or staff or students and have a real discussion about this. And I imagine in the last 7 years, since 2015, which is the last time we did this on the ground, you know, those discussions have become even more relevant and you can add more elements like surveillance, right? Like social media platforms and their discontents, etc. So I wanted to start this discussion off by looking at a very early and I think focused use case of how you build a curriculum to bring your community into a discussion around what is domain of one's own, and more importantly, abstracting out a bit and saying, what is the platform that it represents, namely the web and all of its possibilities and also its concerns. So that was the first one I wanted to lead with at UMW. And again, it was called the Domain of One's Own Faculty Initiative, and you can find it at fi.umwdomains.com.
And Jim, just while you've been chatting here, I went ahead and created a thread in Discord called Domain of One's Own Workshop Curriculum, where we have this linked. John Stewart also linked curriculum and materials for most of the early OU Create workshops and learning communities, which have been preserved on Keegan Longwheeler's site. And that is listed there as well. I also listed one for MSU Domains Fellows Program, which if we have time, we can chat about in a bit, but that one was pretty cool too, where they've got a couple week-long seminars to get faculty up to speed with a digital presence.
Yeah, I actually would like to look at some of the other iterations. I know we've already, tapped on the door of John Stewart again, but if he wants to come and talk a little bit about the stuff they did with Keegan, that's great. But one of the things I was interested in is, MSU has a very specific focus for their domains, and when they talk about, and MSU, I mean Michigan State University, they have a very focused vision. And that vision is driven by their dean, Chris Long. And there's a great video of him talking about, what domains is and why do it. And for them, it's about preparing the scholars, graduate students and PhD students and folks who are coming into their discipline to think through what it means to share their work publicly and to build a kind of basically a life of the mind virtually connected of what MSU's strengths are as an actual research hub. And I really like that. They have a very focused kind of frame for what they do. And they have built a curriculum around that for the faculty and the graduate students and the PhD students who are coming up. So maybe it's worth talking a little bit about that because it's very powerful.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the link is right there in Discord, so feel free to follow along, but they call it the Domains Fellows Program, which is an introductory course for faculty who want to establish their web presence. And Jim, you and I went and sat in on campus with them a couple of years ago and sat in on one of their, I think, workshops with faculty. And so we were able, it was a cool moment where we were able to see it in action, but I think faculty walk in the door not really knowing much about this space, but being interested and seeing how it could be helpful for their courses, for example, or their own professional work, and so kind of like the Coventry Learn Support page breaks down, what is the World Wide Web all the way through installing WordPress and getting course sites up and running. I think that's the end goal, right? Is that over the course of 6 weeks or something, they've got a really achievable, workable solution for course sites going forward. But in the beginning, you're starting at, the bare bones basics of what web hosting even is. So I really like this as just a cool model to, take faculty in one step at a time.
And I think one of the cool things, and you'll see it in the UMW curriculum too, I think week 6 in the UNW or week 5 in the UNW curriculum, one of the things they focus on, and I think it's very similar to Michigan State, is what kind of online web-based realities exist in your scholarly discipline. And I think that's, for me, has been an interesting kind of like development, since we started pushing WordPress in 2005, 2006, and we were on Twitter in 2007, and people like, I don't know what you ate for lunch, like that whole joke. Fast forward 15 years later, and I think just about every academic existing in various disciplines has some real investment in online virtual communities wherever they may live. If it's Facebook, if it's Twitter, if it's some other space like Slack or a blogosphere or what, like, it's no longer like this odd thing that's existing at the margins. It's in some way central to how the discourse in their discipline is happening. And I think that's one of the things that I think should be front and center with platforms like Domain of One's Own, for example, is this offers another space for your faculty, for your administrative faculty, for your staff to build some of those spaces where that conversation can happen. And more broadly, that's what it should be as a platform for your entire university. So I love the curriculum because we like, let's have this conversation on the ground with the faculty to give them a sense of why this is important. What are the deep intellectual roots? Because faculty want to read, like they don't want to be told it's great. You can also buy your shoes there and it's Instagram. They want to know why.
Right, exactly. And I think just like we are currently sitting in this space too and thinking about what's the best way to build a Domain of One's Own curriculum for admins, or how are we talking about WordPress multi-site? I think a lot of Domain of One's Own admins are thinking about how they can best talk about this on campus, and everybody's got their own strategies. And I think if we can bring those to the forefront so everyone can see that, we're not recreating the wheel, and we can really use and lean on each other to share those resources. And Taylor, I know, oh, sorry.
No. And that's why it was great to see Jon Stewart's example emerge in the text today, in the chat and Discord, and to hear more about other people kind of strategizing this kind of thing, because I don't think we live in isolation with it.
Exactly. And I think John actually linked to one more as a pitch towards grad students on why it's important to build a personal site about their work. And I just took a look at that site. It's called digitalpresence.oucreate.com. And it's pretty cool. I can share my screen really quick. This is my first time seeing it actually. So I'm literally navigating through it on the fly for the first time. That's but I love that it's just a start button, to get started into establishing your presence with a website. So I think that's really cool. It looks like they're highlighting community work as well, how to use social media as part of that.
And there's some beautiful, like really overlapping with this and with Michigan State's. And the idea of a university taking some initiative to understand the value of the faculty and admin faculty sharing the work they do and getting it out there and being behind it. It's not only good for the folks, it's also good for the university and more broadly the community to know what other people are thinking. Gardner Campbell said it best when he talked about blogging and the work we're doing is like what it starts to expose a platform like at the time UMW Blogs, or I believe Domain of One's Own, it exposes the life of the mind of a university. And I still hold on to that idea. I think it is a super powerful way to think about the work we're doing, and kind of really undergirds some of the power of getting people on campus to think broadly, not just about, oh, we're going to blog for an assignment, it's going to be graded, but no, these tools are changing the way we communicate and interact online more broadly. And we need to take that seriously as universities, to be relevant and also interesting, right? Like, I think it's important.
So with that, I know we, have a couple examples to, that we're sort of working through, and it looks like more are still being added to the chat, but it might be a good opportunity to chat about the domains camp for St. Norbert.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about this because this is a conversation we've been having with the folks at St. Norbert about something they want to build, and then, hopefully is useful to the greater domains community in that they could kind of pick up and run with it. To be perfectly honest, I as putting sessions together, I was like, we really should highlight this, and some of it I'm hoping that if you have more questions on it, that you could probably direct those to Annika, and she can kind of talk, field those with the team here at St. Norbert, because they're kind of partnering with us at Reclaim, and we'll be building it and working with them. But a lot of the vision here is kind of something that they've laid out actually. So just want to make that clear because I think it is a kind of a cool vision. So St. Norbert wants to build a domains camp, is what the current name for it, and essentially starting out from the concepts of digital identity and ownership and what that means on the web, essentially going through connecting those ideas to Domain of One's Own, and connecting to what is Domain of One's Own to how do you do stuff with Domain of One's Own. So kind of going that full stack of like, let's talk about why you would want to do something like this. Let's talk about what the tools are and what they mean and how that's an answer for the why, right, of identity and ownership. And then let's do it. Like, let's make an account. Let's make a WordPress site if you've not done that before. And so the idea is that it would be sort of module based. So basically the kind of draft version of this right now includes 7 modules, and the modules are of varying lengths, to be perfectly honest. But some of this is still kind of changing and evolving. But like I said, starting with digital identity and ownership, talking about, having folks create an account and talking about the basics of just installing WordPress and doing that in a group setting alongside other people. So one of the main ideas behind the Domains Camp is that it would be synchronous but flexible. So essentially, I know St. Norbert is really excited about delivering this in a synchronous, probably mostly in-person way. But the idea here is, because these are all built into modules, is that if another school picked this up and said, we're not going to do it that way, that it would be flexible enough that you could take sort of the curriculum here and do with it what you want. So the idea being, I could totally see some folks breaking out the modules around identity and maybe what is LAMP, and making that like discussions that happen maybe in a different space, and maybe having the getting started with your account stuff is more asynchronous, or you could flip that, right? Like, I think there's a lot of flexibility there. But the idea of them being modules is that you can kind of pick and choose what you want out of them.
One of the things that comes to mind when you talk about this, and it goes back to discussions we had around documentation and it is actually a kind of relevant thing. Is like we hear there's been work like this at Muhlenberg. Tierney talks about the stuff they've done at Grinnell. We hear John and Keegan been doing great stuff at OU, and obviously the earlier stuff at UMW, and there's more to follow. I don't even think we mentioned Muhlenberg yet, but the idea here is like, and we've heard about this from documentation. I know I'm taking a long time to build up, but bear with me.
Good.
We actually, like, if we could do this in a modular way, in some version of a GitHub, like, you know where I'm going with this, like we're thinking about with documentation, so that we can both have people quickly fork it, take it, customize it, but then share back their changes. And that's that sharing back that we always run into issues with, would be a really interesting way to think about. And I know this is already where you're probably going with Domains Camp, to get a curriculum like that easily accessible and forkable and customizable, like documentation, for a whole community who might want to grab it and go.
Yeah, honestly, this is kind of talking about this live. This isn't something that we've talked about a lot, but as you're saying that, because we've talked a lot in the community, like in community chats around documentation and how can we make this a group thing? We're all doing it. How do we combine our efforts? GitHub comes up a lot in that conversation. And the thing I always say with there is like, look, I love that stuff as much as anybody, but no one on earth saying Git is approachable is correct. So how do you marry those efforts, right? In a way that is approachable for new admins and people who maybe have already used Git. So what I'm thinking though is like, I think maybe this could be a really good test case for that. Like maybe we make the Domains Camp the source of it, right? Like the content stuff, maybe that's in a GitHub repository or something like it. And then we can use this to explore, how do people propose changes to it? And how does that work? This, starting from here, where we're only talking about 7 modules, is probably a very approachable place to start. And we can learn with the community on like, okay, this does not work for people, or this does.
And it will inform the design of the content. And from the beginning, say like, we want this to be shareable. We want this to be, customizable, but also ability to share back some of those changes so other people can say, oh, that was cool.
Yeah. One of the things that is always tricky about these like workshops that people, and they make them in WordPress, right? Often, or like the content. And of course, right? It's about the web. It should be of the web. I get that. But what's not real easy with WordPress based things for this is, if you're an individual who wants to take and they say like, yep, it's Creative Commons, come and use it for whatever. If you're an ed tech at an institution looking at that, like your best bet is to just like click on web pages and copy paste stuff. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But unless you're given a WordPress login and then you go like export stuff, it's actually not that straightforward, right? But starting with, hey, this is a GitHub repository with the probably markdown files is probably how I would do this. And this is how you can use them. Starting there and people knowing that, okay, at the worst case, if I download a zip of this, I have the stuff and I can start from this point, even if I don't want to deal with GitHub.
I don't know if anyone out there remembers this epic in Mike Caulfield's career, but for a while, Mike Caulfield was talking about the smallest federated wiki, and that inspired, inspired a bunch of people. And I think he was playing with a tool, and we had used some version of that DocuWiki to actually try and create documentation early on for Domain of One's Own that could be shareable seamlessly. And MediaWiki used to use similar technology like transclusion to pull a part of another article into this article. So you could have the content in modules in one place, but then pull it in to make a whole series of different. And that was using transclusion, which I think is a more general abstract application for how you can pull content from one site to another seamlessly.
Yeah.
And I think, returning to some of these questions around not only the curriculum, which I think you're right, it's manageable and we can think it through, but then say, okay, what did we learn from that? And how can we do better with documentation in that regard would be a really great kind of push for this kind of, because, curriculum is a particular form of sharing, but people are going to want to customize it because everybody's community is different.
It will be it'll be a great starting place, but there's going to be things as simple as like, oh, our screenshots don't look like that, right? Yeah. Like to me, that's like the first thing that happens when people have the the built-in documentation with domain of one's own is it's state you screenshots, which is about as good as we can do, or not include screenshots, right? Yeah. So to have that be the first thing, a lot of the stuff that I'm hoping to do with Domains Camp is kind of, it's weird because one of the things I'm still kind of working out with the folks at St. Norbert of what's the best way to do this is it's curriculum, but some of it I think needs to be kind of forward facing too, like talking me, Taylor, not in my voice, right? More as a generic voice to the participant through the facilitator, right? Because it's not like we're coming on campus to do all your curriculums. This is something that you're supposed to be able to pick up and use with your faculty. So some of it is in the voice of me saying, this would be a good time to explore the cPanel file manager. And some of it is going to be more direct right to the participant. So I think as of right now, we're probably thinking mostly as a curriculum that would be sort of read and interpreted and delivered. But, but some of that will be, direct. Here's a video I made that you can have your folks look at to explain this particular concept. And those are different voices, right? Those are two different audiences. One is for a teacher and one is for I'm going to call them student, but I mean student of the curriculum, not on your campus student. That's not that students, I think, could benefit from this too. I just mean it could be for students, faculty, or staff.
We're all students.
We're all students of the web, really.
It's interesting because in the conversation, I can see that Jackie and Ed and even Matt are excited about this, but mentions of SCORM, which kind of gives me a little bit of whiplash and shock. So I'm sorry, Jackie and Ed, when I hear SCORM, my head bounces, my eyes glaze over and my head bounces
SCORM
back.
Is tricky.
It is tricky. And Tin Can API, again, I mean, I do think APIs provide a vast resource. I do think that, when you're talking to I'll use myself as the average ed tech, it assumes a lot of kind of knowledge and infrastructure to get access to that. But that's something I think as a community we can build together. So I appreciate you all. Yeah, it is real, Jackie. And I appreciate you all throwing in there. But I think, we have certain tools right now that can get us a little bit far. And to Matt's point, like putting it into GitHub, playing around with that, and seeing where it leads would be a really good outcome, not only of having a curriculum that other folks can use, which I love that St. Norbert's is doing that, but then thinking through how can that be a model for sharing resources more generally, whether it's curriculum, documentation, templates for sites, etc. It goes on. And I think that's what we need to build. So cool. I know we're running basically down to about a minute or two left. So any last points before we wrap up this session and move on to our next session, which will feature John Stewart talking about next generation tools. Am I right with that or am I wrong? Hold on, let me make sure I'm not.
Yeah, next session is with John Stewart, and he's going to kind of share some of the work that he's been, the things he's been working on to make informed decisions around deprovisioning. And we're showing that with the intent that, maybe these are tools we can bring to the wider Reclaim community if they'd be useful. And that'll be in a few minutes.
And I just have to say quick, Matt Davis wrote in the chat, I'd love to think through the process of building open documentation through GitHub.
Yeah.
And I think that in and of itself would be huge because we think about that for support documentation templates for domain of one's own in general and how that's been a challenge. So
that's a generative discussion I think we need to, push on. And I love that we have Reclaim Ed Tech and GitHub to maybe, in Discord to maybe like build that out and harness some of that so we can keep it going. Because that's always the issue is just keeping it going and having those conversations.
And then being able to update it.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, all right. We are wrapping up here and we will see you in the next session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.